Julianne Reeve. He's a consultant, a TEDx speaker, and the author of Captain Perfection and the Secret of Self-Compassion. It is a self-help book for the young perfectionist. Yep, we start young to be a perfectionist. His adaptive perfectionism helped him become the music director for the Broadway musical Hamilton in the USA and played a considerable role in his fortune to travel the world with his work and establish 3 successful companies in the creative sector. Today, we will be talking about ways to be and work with your own perfectionism. I love to hear from you. So connect with me through my website, Foojan.com, and follow my social media, all of them with Dr. Foojan Zain, and message me with your comments and topics of interest. But first, here's the tip of the week.
Join the conversation every Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Pacific for Inner Voice Heartfelt Chat with Dr. Foojan. Dr. Foojan is a radio and TV host, international speaker, psychotherapist, life coach, and the author of Life Reset, The Awareness Path to Create the Life You Want. She brings you the latest research and interviews with experts in the field of cognitive sciences. Anyone who loves to grow and create growth for humanity gets a voice on this call-in show. Inner Voice Heartfelt Chat with Dr. Foojan. Monday afternoons at 3 p.m. Pacific on Smart Talk KMET 1490 AM and on KMET1490AM.com.
Hey, this is Dr. Foojan, and this is the tip of the week. Spring is here. The delicate beauty of flowers that are all around my backyard. Celebrating Nowruz, the new day, an ancient Iranian celebration of the beginning of spring. So exciting. I've been feeling elated about celebrating with family members. After 1 year of isolation and having to only socialize through Zoom, after getting our vaccine, we are finally celebrating face to face. Enjoying each other, being in each other's presence is so amazing. Feeling the energy of togetherness is great. Even talking on top of each other in a gathering, which used to be really annoying, feels like a blessing since Zoom would not allow us to talk all at the same time and made us really, really polite. I've been feeling grateful for all of the different venues of connecting that are present to us. Yes, the ability to connect to everyone in the world through technology and being in the vicinity of someone's presence all at the same time. I'm enjoying running groups and being with clients on video as much as I truly enjoy having clients in my office. And I thank you, all of you clients who are driving so far to be with me in my office. Thinking about what's new in my life, I'm going to share with you a feeling of safety and security, family, union, togetherness, love, and gratitude is almost felt on a daily basis. And that's exciting to me. That is new for me to have such an elated mood constantly. So it's wonderful. And I wish it all upon all of you. I'm also excited about new ventures, such as teaching the awareness integration theory at the university. Yay! Offering a certification program for therapists and coaches in the approach, and creating an app based on the approach. So everyone around the world, a different actually languages also, to be able to have the app to work through for themselves, and lots of newness. And that's why I'm so excited about just this newness coming up. And that's where the spring shows up with all of the newness and brings this joy. It's like flourishing, blossoming. I've also noticed that there are behaviors and thought processes that I have to let go. in order to bring all of this newness, to open the space for the new ways of being, such as letting go of my expectation for people to be the way I think they should be, people doing things the way I want them to, and grow in the timing that I set for them and react the way I think it's right. Yep. Don't you guys feel that way at times? Most of all, letting go of the negativity as it shows up from inside myself or shows up from outside. An allowance and acceptance of life showing up as is. I can choose the best of what is offered while I can choose the best of my thoughts and emotions and feelings and behaviors to offer to people around me. That is my new commitment. How about you? What is your new life? What new feelings are you experiencing? And instead of just telling me, no, everything's the same, start looking for something new. I'm positive every day brings something new for you if you start looking for it, right? So, what are some of the new feelings that you're experiencing? What new feelings do you desire to experience? What new thought forms and behaviors would you desire to have and commit to? What new experiences do you have or do you desire to have? What new ventures are you excited about in your life? What do you have to let go in order to open the space for those new ventures to show up? And what is your new commitment to yourself and others? Write them down and share them with me. Email me with them, foojanzain@gmail.com or drfoojanzain@gmail.com, either or. And go to my social media. Let me know what you think and what you write. I'd love to hear from you with all of your experiences. Now, for more observational and self-esteem journey, go to my book, Life Reset, The Awareness Integration Path to the Life You Want. And even when you do the exercises in that book, write to me. Let me know your experiences. And as you go through the journey, I love to hear from you. Have you ever wished you could just wake up one day, reach across your nightstand, and hit the life reset button? Let's face it, the struggles and frustrations of everyday life leave millions of women and men around the globe yearning for a new way. And the new way is right here in Life Reset, the awareness integration path to create the life you want by Dr. Foojan Zain. You can get it now at foojan.com or amazon.com. Life Reset, the awareness integration path to create the life you want. You deserve it. This is Dr. Foojan, and this is the Ask Me segment. I have gotten this question from someone who answered me on my LinkedIn. And the question is, how do I handle my emotional numbness? It's really uncomfortable, and I feel so away from everybody, and sometimes it's scary. I'm sure it is. It is awkward when we feel that numbness. Sometimes the numbness shows up because it's a reaction to something, like a reaction to a medication that you're experiencing. But overall, when we're just looking at the emotional numbness, it could be a signs of anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress. For someone who's been has been traumatized before and they continue to have it. So when it's about anxiety, sometimes we become really numb because we're feeling so much anxiety that our system kind of shuts it down in order for us to be able to kind of exist and survive that moment. So it becomes, it will go shutting down. I've even had people who've experienced kind of depersonalization, as if they're kind of like leaving their body, or they have a tingling feeling in their tingling sensation, but not really a feeling. There are other people who, due to a lot of depression, There's this chronic, constant sadness, and after the sadness, they'll go into a numbness. And sometimes, when the intensity of the emotion is so high for us in our body, our system has a shutdown valve which says, I can't handle all this intensity, so I'm just going to disconnect from it. In order not to be overwhelmed by it. And if we've done that too long, well, because maybe we were living in a family that had too much in type of emotions that were consistently part of the everyday living. I've worked with children, for example, who lived with families and parents who were constantly fighting, and there was abuse, in yelling and screaming and domestic violence. And you see many of these children at one point, or just they just go numb because they can't handle it. They disconnect completely from all that's happening, even the sound of, what's going on in the other rooms, to be able to survive this space. And because of this, they might have just kind of like held that into their system all the way to, their adulthood, where they shut down their own emotion, they shut down their anger, they shut down their sadness, as if emotions are dangerous. So if the association with emotions has been, um, I can't handle it, I'm overwhelmed, I'll die from it, um, it's too much for me, then the system shuts down, and then will continue to be shutting down if we've never learned how to manage and handle emotions. Many people go through this until something really, another disastrous episode happens in their life, and then it just bursts. And then they can't handle that, kind of like the wall that's been holding it, the dam that has been holding it. The bad news is that when you numb yourself that way, because you don't want to experience the negative ones, you also shut down and numb all the positive feelings that you really want to experience, such as happiness, joy, and all of those. So people stop feeling connectedness. They don't feel the love and the intensity of love that shows up, and they sometimes get scared when the intensity shows up. If someone falls in love with them, or you have a little puppy or a little baby which comes in front of them and just explores and explodes with all of this amazing emotion, they get scared and they move back because they have no idea how to handle that. So what do we do with this type of emotional numbness? If you've been traumatized before and you experience this type of emotional numbness due to trauma, I really request from you to seek psychotherapy and learn step by step in how to contain, name, and contain the emotion, plus to heal the past, and be able to, release yourself from the hold of the trauma that's been there and all the meanings that you've given and you've had to suffer through. If that's not the case, and you're finding yourself being in a space of, whether it was a practice that you did, or by accident you felt numb and then it kind of stayed, it's more of learning how to notice your emotions. So the first way of noticing emotions and feelings is to be in your body. Many people have kind of depersonalized and dissociated from their body, again, because of the intense emotion. So the point is, how do we get back to our body? If you notice, like when you go into cold water, you put your toes in and then you bring it out, and then you put the rest of your feet in, and then you bring it out, and then go you slowly but surely until your whole body is in the white, is in the cold pool. It's kind of the same thing we do with emotions. So, what you want to do is to start being in your body and feeling the sensations. So, practice with me if you can. Start experiencing your breathing and the way that you smell. When you breathe in, what type of a smell does it have, and then what type of a temperature the air has as it goes into your nostrils. And then as you breathe out, experience the air coming through your mouth, and taste, what type of a taste does your mouth have. And then kinesthetic, what kind of a temperature do you feel around you? What do you see? What kind of a light you see around you? What kind of sound do you hear? I hear my dog barking right now. What other sounds do you hear around you in your own vicinity? And you can see that you can come back into your body and experience the body. Now, watch your thoughts and also go into your system and your body and see what kind of emotions and feelings you're experiencing. Start learning how to name those emotions, whether it is sadness or anxiety or joyous or calm or whatever it is that it shows up, and begin naming it and recognizing those again for yourself. If it's hard for you to recognize emotions, one of the things you could do is start looking at different types of movies or different types of music, which they're all designed to provoke emotions in you. So as you're watching the movie and start feeling your body and the sensations that are happening, and see what type of emotions are showing up for you. Because the more you practice with the day-to-day experiences of small intensities of emotions, then you can get used to sitting with your emotion and delving into more intense ones. If you need support and you are afraid of experiencing your emotion because you think, if I'm right on the edge of the well of the sadness or depression or rage, and if I ever go in there, there's no way that I can come out and it's going to be destructive, seek help. Get a therapist so that you could work with your emotion and slowly but surely learning how to stay in your body, feel the emotion, name the emotion, and then release the emotion if it's unwanted, and feel it and contain it and experience it if it's something that's pleasurable that you want to keep it. Every emotion has some sort of message for you. So you also want to know what the thought process is beside the emotion for you and what it is that is sharing with you. And if you need to do anything about it, or just remember it and enjoy it. Other people that I've noticed that are becoming a little bit depersonalized and lack of emotions also are people who are using drugs. Sometimes a drug invokes type of a depersonalization. So if that's also what you're doing, my suggestion is try um, to get off of it and see what experiences your body will have again, experiencing your true emotions and feelings. I hope that was helpful.
Have you ever wished you could just wake up one day, reach across your nightstand, and hit the life reset button? Let's face it, the struggles and frustrations of everyday life leave millions of women and men around the globe yearning for a new way. And the new way is right here in Life Reset, the awareness integration path to create the life you want, by Dr. Foojan Zain. You can get it now at foojan.com or amazon.com. Life Reset, the awareness integration path to create the life you want. You deserve it.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm Dr. Foojan Zain, and I am with Julian Reeve. He's an author, consultant, speaker, and has been a perfectionist for over 40 years. His adaptive perfectionism helped him become the music director for the Broadway musical Hamilton in the US, and played a considerable role in his fortune to travel the world with his work and established 3 successful companies in the creative sectors. He is the author of Captain Perfection and the Secret of Self-Compassion. This is a self-help book for the young perfectionist. Welcome to this show, Julian.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
So first, when I heard about perfectionism and your work, obviously, and all the things that you have done, I was waiting to look at a perfectionism from an adult perspective, and I was really pleasantly surprised that you have started with young group, because it is so true that, people right now, as I was doing a lot of my had conversation with teens and youth, and even starting with the middle school in the United States, which I've been talking to them, is the element of school and perfectionism and their grades and how they have to, be the perfect person, and not only to their grades, but all of these social camps and things that they've got to do in order to go to college. So the level of stress and anxiety has been sky high. So thank you for, attempting to work with that population first. But what got you to even come to want to work with perfectionism, and then what got you interested to work with that population of the young youth?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I used to be the music director of Hamilton, as you said in my intro. And it was 4 months into the job, I experienced a heart attack. And I was 43 years old, and work with a psychologist would uncover perfectionism to kind of be the cause. Basically, my maladaptive perfectionism in my 20s and 30s really affected my self-esteem and confidence. And I was in party time throughout my 20s and 30s, trying to make myself feel better about myself. And I treated my body very badly. And ostensibly, that's what caused my right coronary artery to be 90% blocked. And so I went back to work, and, Hamilton was obviously a fantastic job to have. And I realized whilst I was kind of going through the process of kind of realigning my perfectionism, that actually it was something that I was quite passionate about. So when I left the show in 2019, I actually did a TED talk on the subject to start my journey, arguing that, we should be looking at perfectionism differently. The title of the TED talk is Redefining Perfectionism, the Vital Need for Change. Because I understood very early in my research that we look at perfectionism largely as a one-dimensional thing, but it's super important to regard it as multidimensional. And in the talk, I broke it down to adaptive and maladaptive, kind of healthy and unhealthy perfectionism. And the talk, generated some really interesting opportunities and conversations. And I realized soon after doing it that Captain Perfection, who I'd actually had characterized and illustrated for the TED Talk, would be a really great way to actually start speaking to kids at a young age about perfectionism, because that's often when perfectionism starts. So to your point, it's super important that we start to have more conversations about perfectionism at a younger age. So that's the why of the book, and why I came about to write it.
Thank you. Can you also share a little bit about what you came up with the healthy versus the unhealthy perfectionism? I'm a therapist, so I work a lot with people who they thrive on living their excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, not only being detailed oriented, but making sure in what is expected of them in the community, or whatever the world or the genre that they're working, the career path that they're working, and making sure that they're meticulous about it, and they, reap all the rewards that are out there, and, wanting to get the valuable feedback from the world, and kind of like define their identity through the world of others looking back at them and telling them, that they're valuable or not. You have created the system of, okay, these are the healthy ones, which will get you somewhere and will give you the reward with less consequence. And these are the ones that are unhealthy, and they will get you more consequences than the reward. Can you share a bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So it was really psychologists Hewitt and Flett in the early 1990s who came up with the multi-dimensional perfectionism scale that broke the subject down into 3 parts. And then from that, people started talking about perfectionism as adaptive and maladaptive. So if we take the kind of the description of what perfectionism actually is, we can actually look at the adaptive and maladaptive side. So perfectionism is a personality characteristic defined as striving for flawlessness and setting exceedingly high standards for performance, accompanied by tendencies for overly critical evaluations. So if we take that description of the subject, the adaptive side is striving for flawlessness and setting exceedingly high standards for performance. And the maladaptive side is the accompanied by tendencies for overly critical evaluations. So it's important to define the adaptive side, and much of how I encourage people to think about perfectionism in terms of whether they're trying to consider their perfectionism to be adaptive or maladaptive is where their perfectionism is driven from. If they are striving for flawlessness and setting exceedingly high standards for performance themselves, and that's not driven by any form of fear or any form of low self-esteem or any other reason outside of simply wanting to do the best that you can or be the best that you can be, then largely that's adaptive perfectionism. You could still be striving for flawlessness and setting exceedingly high standards for performance in a maladaptive way if actually it's driven by fear, or it's driven by the perception that others need to see you to be perfect. Otherwise, you won't be regarded as good enough in their eyes. So it's quite a complicated definition. But in general, the adaptive side is all the good stuff, and conscientiousness is a big one. Attention to detail, generally striving for their absolute best in everything that they could do, provided it comes from the adaptive side, and again, not fueled by any form of fear or correlation from anybody else, largely defines adaptive.
I've also experienced working with people that the concept of I'm not good enough has been set in in a very young age for them. And then that also, like you said, fuels the concept of perfectionism. And the problem also shows up that there's no measurement. It's okay if people have some measurement to strive toward, but most of the people I've worked with have no measurement of what is perfect. So sometimes we'll say, okay, if you land such and such, if you get to this outcome, then we'll put a perfect on it. But unfortunately, there's never kind of this measurement that if I've gotten here, then I'm perfect. It's almost like the bar keeps going higher and higher, regardless of what you've achieved, and regardless of how many people will tell you, great, you can win awards, you can get A's at school, you can get all of those. But it seems like regardless, you're still living with that type of like, I'm not good enough sense, which then is like, well, can you please write down what good enough is? And almost nobody can tell me what good enough is within their own world, because it does not match the good enough of the external world. Because, like if you said the height of what I want to do is to get a Tony Award, for example, for that, and then you get a Tony Award and it's like, okay, whatever, it's sitting there now, then it's not, I'm not perfect again.
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, what is the measurement? And that's where I think the flaw into the system shows up, where there is no path to get there. It's always the next one, the next one, the next one. Is that what you experienced or see as you've been writing the book?
Yeah, absolutely. And largely it's born from perfectionists are governed by a fixed mindset. So they will often think that there is only one way to do things, and they will often consider the result as the only important thing. So what I try and do in my work with perfectionists is actually to encourage people to regard the journey to the result as important, if not more important, than the result itself. And certainly when I went back to work after the heart attack, went back to work with Hamilton, I needed to come up with different kind of measurement techniques and management techniques for my perfectionism to, help me do that in healthier ways, or to help me maintain the job in healthier ways. And certainly one of the big ways I did that was, rather than to evaluate a successful performance on the result, I would evaluate a successful performance by the journey to the result. And what happens is you become much more aware of what's around you. You become much more aware of other people. And so you're less focused on you, which actually ironically then frees you up to be because you're less focused on you, and it's less fear-based, and it's less, pressured. I have to be right. I have to be perfect. You end up actually relaxing. So therefore you, in my case, perform better because you are more relaxed. So that's a different way to approach it. But yes, you're quite right. One of the many problems with perfectionism is that, once you've achieved what you think perfection to be, there's always something else. And certainly when we get to one of the messages I was very keen to get into the book as well is that another big problem with perfectionism is that we all have a different idea of what perfection actually is. What I consider perfection to be, other people will be like, I'm sorry, are you joking? No, sorry, that's not right. And, if we picked 100 people, there would be 100 different opinions as to what was right and what's wrong and what's perfect and what's imperfect. So it really does come down to a decision, really, for perfectionists. What denotes perfection in life? And ultimately what I'm trying to promote is what denotes perfection, I hope for everybody, is actually happiness. Because, we have to draw perfectionism, or what we regard perfection to be, as a feeling, as an approach to life, as opposed to a result of what we may have achieved.
You also talk about self-compassion, and you brought the conversation of self-kindness and mindfulness and common humanity into the system. So not only to, look at the journey as we're going instead of just the result, but to also add the self-compassion and how do we speak with ourselves and how do we love ourselves and nurture ourselves through the path, because obviously, like you talked about, the critical mind that is constantly evaluating and let's say devaluating
yes,
everything that we've done. So share a bit about what you mean by self-compassion and mindfulness.
Yeah, well, self-compassion was defined by Kristin Neff, who's the kind of leading psychologist on the subject, as a practice in which we learn to be a good friend to ourselves when we need it the most. And Kristin breaks self-compassion down into three components. Self-kindness, where we learn to be warm and understanding towards ourselves. Mindfulness, where we discover how to observe thoughts and feelings as they arise, but not necessarily to engage with them. And then this common humanity, where we recognize that suffering and imperfection is part of the human experience. And just because we make mistakes doesn't make us any different from anybody else, because everyone makes mistakes. So those three components are actually a very powerful combination to kids in particular, because if we can start to build the language of ostensibly how we can be kinder to ourselves, then we can manage maladaptive perfectionism better. So what kind of got me onto the idea was that self-compassion is proven to regulate our experience with depression. So then when you kind of put perfectionism on the front end, self-compassion in the middle, and depression on the back end, there's a better experience for perfectionists by the inclusion of self-compassion. That's where I got the idea from.
Yes, it really does work. I know that in many level that I've worked with the perfectionism, usually they come to my office because they have heightened anxiety and they have panic attacks.
Mm-hmm.
They can't sleep. So that's how we start with the conversation, and then we end up with perfectionism. And you're absolutely right that the kind of like the end result becomes depression. So it starts with the anxiety, and then the end result becomes the depressive state, because they're constantly proving to themselves that somehow they're bad and wrong, which every single result shows they're not. But
Yeah.
their assessment of the external result is very different than
Oh,
assessment of
sure.
what's going on inside of them.
Right.
And you're absolutely right in the way that shifting the sentences of the self-talk from devaluing and constantly being critical to an acceptance of, I love what you said, the humanness is, it's acceptance that at any point that I might make a mistake. And one of the things that I usually share with them is, where does this constant expectation come from, that from the minute that you were born into this world, you should have been a master at everything without ever trying
Right.
anything, and
Yeah.
making a mistake.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a fallacy of expectation of the self that is rise there. And what's funny, Julian? Sometimes we think, it all comes from our parents, and it's always the family's fault. But I've worked with people's families, which that's not really their way of speaking or even putting down. So it's sometimes I could say, yes, it has been contributed to maybe, a parenting style. But a lot of it is also, even if the parenting style has never been that, it's this construct of wanting to be the best in the world, and then getting lost in that somehow.
Yeah.
And your body told you enough is enough. You can't get lost outside of yourself. You got to come back and be kind to yourself and your body. And from there, it seems like you really shifted your way of being with yourself, your thought process, and your body, in a sense, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that really was the bottom line. And I think, the more I dug into perfectionism, the more I realized that actually I truly believe that its root is self-worth. And, if we are, I find it so ironic that why is it that we're almost hardwired not to treat ourselves as we are able to treat others? If our best friend is going through a crisis, a health issue or a divorce or whatever, we can be the most supportive people in the world, and we can be really good friends. We can put our arms around them. We can be compassionate. We can make the situation better. If we ourselves find ourselves in their shoes, the whole situation changes. And it is fascinating how much of that is associated with, I don't deserve the same level of treatment as my best friend does. So again, it comes down to the self-worth. And that was very much my kind of start of journey with perfectionism. I realized that actually mine started in childhood. Both of my parents were very successful musicians. My mother was my very first piano teacher. And, so I grew up in a results-based environment. And, I've realized that really my perfectionism probably started around the age of 5 or 6, because every mistake I made at the piano gave an opportunity for my mother to love me less. That's where my perfectionism was born from. And of course, that wasn't true, but perfectionism wasn't really, it wasn't discussed. It wasn't really my parents didn't know that they were perfectionists. They certainly didn't know that I was a perfectionist. And that's because, I was born in 74, and perfectionism wasn't really kind of researched in any great detail before 1990. So, people of my age have kind of grown up in this huge void of knowledge and information. And it's fantastic now that there's much more at people's fingertips to be able to get into to develop healthier management techniques earlier on.
I also think that part of the era that changed was before there used to be only one path to get to the top. And you had to go through being perfect to get to that one path. So they were systems set aside to you had to pass through this little funnel in order to get really to the top. And I could see where it would put so much pressure for an author to be able to pass through and get to one publisher, or a musician to be able to go through and do this and get the Tony Award, or what, all of those. Where I think that with the technology, paths have gotten so horizontally massive that it's not this always the hierarchical concept, and therefore it has found its path to every human being has found their own path to get to that success versus only one way of getting there. But I think that the conversation of how I'm sorry, we always also looked at the best possible scenario out of the perfectionism. And as you said, we've been able now to see that if that's what you're going to be striving, these are also the downfalls of it. These are also the consequences and ramifications, and how to be your excellent self, and yet minimize the ramifications. And you, in your book, have come up with how to create your own superpower, let's say. So can you share about your own superpower?
Yeah, sure. No, when I first jumped into perfectionism, I realized that it's really all about language, and it's about knowledge. So the point of Captain Perfection and the Secret of Self-Compassion is to give children their own self-compassion superpower. So what I do in the book is I explain what perfectionism is and the types of behaviors that they might display, so that the children can hopefully relate to that experience. And then I take them through 3 stories that introduce 3 different kids with different elements of perfectionism, and we see how Captain Perfection deals with those elements. And then we kind of look back on those stories and figure out what they experienced, when they experienced them, how they felt when they experienced them. And then we develop we develop the superpower by looking at the 3 elements of self-compassion and building certain techniques. So for example, with self-kindness, we might take a mantra, for example. We might take a mantra such as, I love myself, I am enough. And we'll say that 10 times in our head. And it sounds slightly ridiculous. Those that practice mindfulness will understand that it's not ridiculous at all. But the more you say those types of words to yourself, the more it goes in as positive language, and the more it becomes hardwired, so that one day we wake up and there's kind of no more negativity.
Someday we'll wake up and we're convinced.
Well, maybe that's what we're all aiming for, possibly. So that's kind of the self-kindness element. The mindfulness element really comes in and is super useful for kids, because children, when they experience a perfectionistic episode, there is no anything else in that moment. They're so lost, they're so in the zone, and how to get them out of it is really important. And that's kind of where I used mindfulness, and just encouraging them to, once they knew that they were in an episode, just encouraging them to simply look around the room and identify what they can see, actually brings them back to the present and away from either the past or the future, which is where perfectionism loves to live. It very much thrives in those 2 arenas. And then the common humanity thing, we spoke about, the inability to regard ourselves as we do our best friend, and establishing that knowledge is super important. So Captain Perfection paints a scenario where he asks the child to imagine his best friend in a tricky situation, and gets him to develop the types of language that the child would use to soothe the best friend and make him or her feel better. And then Captain Perfection kind of turns that language inward and encourages the child to use that the next time he goes through a perfectionistic episode. And then, the tail end of the book looks at how we can use all of those tools in certain situations. So it will, throw out different situations where perfectionism is prevalent, and lays out in very simple terms which of those tools they could use. So it's one of those books that develops language, but it's also a kind of self-help book that kids can kind of keep coming back to and reaching for the more they experience perfectionism. And I'm delighted that it's, I've had many adults say, well, I've got as much out of this as my child did, which is great. It's always lovely to hear.
Yes, as I was going through your book, also, I got how much it is toward the concept. And the concept, although it is written in a language and graphs are written in a way that is applicable and desirable for the teen or even younger children. But the points are very valid for all ages. Definitely,
Right.
it's set up as that. You have you have also created three different companies, and you have been in the management world, let's say the leadership and management world. What are your thoughts about perfectionism when it comes into the corporate world or the management world or in the work arena? Because I think, and as a context of a company versus only individualism, because part of what we've been talking about has been your relationship with yourself, but then this relationship with yourself also extends itself, such as we were talking about the parenting, that if you are a perfectionist person, you're going to probably relay that as a parent to your child. You're going to relate that as a mate to your spouse or intimate partner. You're going to somehow relate that to your friends. And if you are a manager in the management or leadership of a company, you're going to relate that to people who are working with you or for you. What is your experience as you extend the perfectionism aspect beyond the self and into relatedness with others?
Yeah, great question, and it's something that I'm really enjoying. Actually, this is very much so. It's almost the core of my work right now, is working with businesses to figure out how they can manage perfectionists and perfectionism successfully. And certainly, my experience, it largely all comes down to one thing, and that's culture. To your point, that leaders, if they are perfectionistic themselves, or if they are in a job that demands perfection, then how they talk to their employees will be driven by their own experience. And so what I'm having to do is I'm having to change the concept of perfectionism from the top down, but also the bottom up. And if we do that, and if we do that successfully, then we all meet in the middle and ostensibly create a new culture where perfectionists can thrive. But it's really interesting how different industries have different perceptions on where they're willing to go with this. Because one business like Apple, for example, will regard employee well-being as being paramount to their success. So they will have done the sums in terms of, well, how do we look at perfectionism? How do we regard it? And cultures like that look at mistakes, for example, as being of value, because you can learn something from mistakes. And so therefore mistakes are almost encouraged, because the more you learn, the more you can perfect, the better your product will be. The complete flip side of that is when a business is largely product driven and not employee driven. So they simply think that actually it's the iPhone that makes the money, not the people making the iPhone. So they look at things very differently, which is largely data based. It's all about the numbers. And if somebody is experiencing a really rough time with perfectionism and is close to burnout, they don't really care, provided they're making the numbers. And if for whatever reason that employee continues to struggle and the numbers go down, there isn't a culture that actually promotes the well-being of that employee. There is a culture that simply says, well, we'll find somebody else. So it's really interesting how the very first conversation with a CEO or somebody in human resources in a company can be hugely enlightening to me in terms of how I build their solution package, because it will tell me, that first conversation will tell me which one of those two cultures they currently promote. And the solutions that I come up with is based on that knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And it's how to bring a balance into the concept of compassion, kindness, and then yet to make sure that the reliability and accountability of everybody with the result is there. And I'm hearing that it's a weaving of those two concepts together, and that I care for you as someone who has the contextual aspect of the company. And yes, your work is important. And how do we bring this where the person themselves can live their best and in creating the results that they want? Is that what I'm hearing from what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this approach evolves, no least with AI, because, artificial intelligence will take over the job, will take over the marketplace. We'll have more machines doing more of the kind of labor, the manual work, the actual building. And so it's going to be really interesting to see where the actual human element of work goes and how that evolves. And I think companies will have to become slightly more in touch with employee wellness because of that. I think, you can get machines to act and actually do the building. But, if you've built a culture and a company that really regards their employees as the true value of what they're creating, you kind of get the best of both worlds, because you create a workforce that, is motivated, is productive, is healthy, all of those things. And then you put that with the AI, you've got a very successful business. If you're still product led and it's all about, whipping your employees as hard as possible to produce as much as possible, then you're going to start to lose people, because actually the types of work that those employees would have done has been taken over by AI to start with. But also, I think the more this culture grows, or this observation of how culture could grow continues, the more employees will be more demanding of better work environments and a culture in which they can thrive.
I'm sensing the next book is coming out.
Interesting. I just need to find the time to write it. It's really interesting. This world of perfectionism started with a TED talk in 2019, and I wrote the book during the pandemic last year. And now it's actually, and I think you picked up on this earlier on, it's as much about self-compassion as it is about perfectionism now. The kind of the core of the message is very much the self-compassion element. And so, I've got numerous kind of plates in the air, and it's right now it's an interesting exercise trying to keep them all spinning. And I'm not entirely sure which one's going to sort of take the lead, but for now that's fine. So yes, there will be a book at some point. Quite in which direction and when, I couldn't tell you.
Well, I'm excited to figure it out with you. I mean, to see it when you figure it out. We have one more minute. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you really, really want our audience to know about, whether your work or your, the concepts of self-compassion and perfectionism, or the book itself?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a parent, and you're a parent of a perfectionistic child, telling them that they are enough, and being aware that they will learn from your behaviors, and so the more vulnerable you can be in front of them is huge. And it's a relatively simple approach to kids. The book Captain Perfection and the Secret of Self-Compassion can be found Amazon, Barnes and Noble, other outlets. My website, julianreeve.com, has got more kind of self-compassion and perfectionism solutions there. But anyone that's struggling, either themselves or with kids or businesses, reach out, send an email, let's have a conversation. Always happy to help where I can.
Yes, and they can also find it in captain-perfection.com. You can learn about the book and see what it is, and get the book. Julianne Reeves, everyone, it's been a pleasure talking to you and having you on the show. And I hope everybody gets the book. And yes, like you said, it's not just for the youth and the kids, it's also for grown-ups.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed that.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.